Welcome to our webinar today, DNA Behaviour, Behaviourally Smart Family Dynamics. This is Hugh Massey, the CEO and founder of DNA Behaviour International. I'm delighted today to have Mike Peduzzi from Da Vinci Global Consulting to talk to you about family dynamics. Mike, by way of background, and I have had a business relationship for the last 16 years, since 2001 when I first stepped into America. I had the great fortune to meet Mike, and we have shared a very deep passion in helping families build a sustainable plan for their future, a sustainable culture for their family, to ensure that the families can all sit around the Thanksgiving table and at least communicate with each other, even if they don't agree on every point, and to overall make their lives better and to pass on the wealth in a much more meaningful way, but also to protect it. So, you know, we've been working actively together in this area, and particularly with families that have got a family business, because the complexities that are there when there's a family business are much greater. But any of the principles that we talk about at DNA Behaviour and that Mike talks about in his presentation today really can overflow to any family, regardless of their level of wealth. Mike is one of our leading wealth mentors. He's highly experienced in the deployment of behavioral tools to understand the behavior of the family members and their employees. And so I'm going to let Michael go in a minute, you know, into his presentation. You know, one thing I think it's important is to, you know, while we're working with Mike on this, he has developed a program, a Rising Leaders program, and I think this is a very unique service that we've been working on, where we look at the passing on of wealth from the perspective of the inheritor, not just the person passing on the wealth, where often a lot of programs and address and there's a lot of conversation, but also from the perspective of the person receiving the wealth, particularly if they're going to have to manage a family business. You know, how do they feel about it? And so the Rising Leaders program that Mike has built is a wonderful solution for that. But also we're seeking to work with financial advisors to help them expand out their businesses so that they feel more supported in working with the complex family issues, particularly as they all deal with or require human behavioral insight. And you know, and where the cases are too complex for someone who's more used to handling the investment management side, we can step in and be a partner without any conflict to the advisor's ongoing relationship. So saying that, I'm going to hand over the mic to Mike and let him talk to you about behaviorally smart family dynamics, particularly from the perspective of you know, how we help family members grow and develop.
Thank you, Hugh. And to Leon Tripp and Bridget and your staff at Behavior DNA, great people to work with. As we start this, I wanted to mention that I've spent about 30 years of my life, as far as parts of it, in financial services. So in a sense, I'm one of you. I put on the screen a picture of the Vitruvian Man, which is synonymous with Da Vinci's work. And what's critical about this image for us as advisors to our clients is we need to look at things from the perspective of how they see their family, their life, their world, and not necessarily just from the realms that we come from. The Vitruvian Man was just an image of how a human being interacts with their environment. And I oftentimes will talk to advisors that are looking for a greater breakthrough or better way to accomplish what they want to accomplish with their goals. And I think as we go through this, if you look at it more from the lens of what your clients or what's important to them and how they need to interact with their environment to be successful, I think that will make for some breakthroughs. As far as DaVinci is concerned, as you mentioned, we are now totally a consulting firm. We don't provide any advisory services such as those that you provide. So we're not in any way, shape, or form in competition with you. We do work with our clients around their operating businesses, the ownership group about their issues, the family of wealth, and also their nonprofits and philanthropic efforts. So we approach things from a very much a systematic way. As DaVinci said, everything is connected to everything else. So when you do something in that system to touch it as you provide your services, there are some rippling effects that go through the lives of your client. And then we think that there was a quote that I like, which is, business is moving faster than it ever has before, and it'll never be this slow again. And so for us to deal with the speed, not only our own practice, but working with our clients, we need to collaborate at new, higher levels than ever before. And so, as you mentioned, we are about collaboration and about helping you, helping your clients accomplish what's important. As we look at being an advisor myself, and I was thinking about my business objectives, I want to keep this in mind because this is the why for why we are talking today. It's how do you as advisors grow your targeted clients, retain those clients, and importantly, expand services not only to them but the future generations that come after them. I don't have to mention some of the startling statistics as to the low level of business that comes once a matriarch and patriarch passes on, the low level of conversion of serving the clients of those people, so of your clients. So, and of course, there's other reasons as well as listed. This may be a little hard to see, but this is the basis for our program that you have sponsored here, which is to look at working with families of wealth and the businesses they own in a comprehensive way. And there's four basic ways we do that. Last call, we talked about the quadrant we call growth, which is more along the lines of individual growth. Today, we're going to speak about issues relating to the family. And then we have the next two calls will focus on business and governance. This is something you may have seen before. It's a Dunning-Kruger study. And what they looked at is how we see things. I like the quote by Confucius up at the top. It says, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. And that seems a little sharp, but if you think about it from the context of what I'm about to say, maybe it'll make sense. So we can look at things from four different ways. And if you think about it, this is a little bit, of course, how your clients look at things, and you may see why you could sometimes get frustrated with people you interact with based on this. So there is the area, of course, of what we know that we know. But if you think of all of the knowledge in the world, you know, at best, if we know 2 or 3% of that, at best, we would be considered very astute. So there's a lot of knowledge out there for us to know. And then we know certain things, but we don't know. I know don't know anything about propelling a rocket to the moon. So those are things that, that are easy. The ones at the bottom are more of the challenging things to us and our clients. And that is, our clients need to have people that know things. And so they want to feel confident that the people they interact with in that bottom left quadrant can provide access to information that the clients, or we ourselves, don't know. It's the reliable sources, the trusted sources. And then there's that area in the far bottom right quadrant is what you can't know. These are just things we're not exposed to. It's just beyond our scope. But many times we are not conscious of that area, right? And so give you an example. It's like when you meet with a client and you have something that's very superlative in service to offer them, and you know that they don't possess that, but when you talk to them, they say they have that covered. So it can get very frustrating. So what we need to do is expand our thinking, expand our clients' thinking. And so hopefully you'll see that as we go through here. And it will take a little bit of effort to expand the thinking in the area of what we might talk to people about, what you can't know. Or in some cases, when we're dealing with them and their family, what we can't know. So with that in mind, let's go, Trip, if you don't mind, to the first poll question.
Very well, Mike. Thank you very much. First question of the morning here. Which of the following activities have you conducted with a client? And see the list below. Facilitated a family meeting covering non-financial matters. Profile with detailed goals to share with other advisors. And enhance their family culture, vision, principles, beliefs. And select all that apply, please. And we'll wait for a decent cross-section of respondents. And give them a few more seconds here. And let's close that up and see where we land. All right, I'm going to share those results. And it's a little mixed in there. It's hard to tell with the 40 and the 80 and the 40 that it is actual varied participants there. But Mike, anything you can gather from the information?
Yes, it's great. It's, you know, we have a good group of people that are doing some in-depth work with their clients, and so we have a cross-section of people that also aren't doing that work. So it's good to know where we stand on that. So thank you, Trip.
Excellent. Well, I'll let you continue on.
Okay. So last call, we talked about a number of things. I'd like to just quickly summarize them. And of course, you have available access to a recording of the last call. So we talked about the importance of bringing the left brain and the right brain together, the logical part that we as advisors are so good at and clients depend on us to provide, but also the more creative side, the more human side that needs to go with the technical. It's kind of like we talked about a laptop computer. You could have the most advanced computer, but if it's not user-friendly, if it's difficult for anybody to get anything out of it, it has very little value. We also talked about what motivates people to do what they do, and sometimes it can be frustrating for us when we think that there is a logical solution and people don't take action. We talked about things being structured in systematic ways in the lives of our clients, and we talked earlier about how everything touches everything else or affects everything else. We talked that everybody has the currencies of time, talent, money, and relationships to work with, and we have to balance those for our clients. We can't just focus on financial issues without consideration of other things. We talked a little bit about the family capitals, the financial capital, the social, the human, the intellectual, in the personal capital. And we talked about those things that for our clients that are most important for them to leave behind, and 98% of the time it's they have to focus on one. It's not about the money. We talked about the drive for and life purpose and calling. If we can connect with our clients around that and we can help them fulfill their purpose and calling in life, how great a relationship you'll have with the clients. Obviously with DNA behavior, we talked about wiring and how that comes into play, and then also just the fact of getting along with other people and being effective. So please take a chance to listen to those calls if you weren't on last call. What we're going to focus on this time are activities around the family. And so the ones listed there are the things that we're going to talk about. We'll cover each one at a time in more depth in just a second. So let's start with family alignment. And I start with this because in any endeavor of a group of people, it's impossible to make successful progress if people aren't aligned. There was a study done by the Project Management Institute which said that only 3 in 10 initiatives or projects that companies undertake and people undertake are successful. And that's just a startling statistic. But if you think about even the work you do with your clients, in many cases, while you may suggest great ideas and recommendations, maybe you can think back and say, you know, how many of those recommendations and ideas were fully implemented? And many times it's the result of having to depend on other advisors to do that work. So I think while it's startling, I think if we really consider it, at least in my experience, that number it doesn't sound unreasonable. So what is alignment? And it's really just the degree to which individuals agree to act in a like manner. And in order to do that, they have to have the answers to the why and the what and the how. And so as we work with groups of people, it's really important to interact with them as a unit together. And many times, of course, in our work, we're retained by a matriarch and patriarch, and oftentimes that's where our work is restricted to those two people. So we're going to talk about how to expand and the value of expanding that here as we go through this presentation. A lot of times people ask me, you know, what are the reasons for misalignment? And 3 of them are on the screen that are the most referenced. And the perception by most people I talk to is that what causes misalignment is different value systems. Maybe one person wants power, another person wants recognition. It may be somebody has a self-centered type of motivation to get something accomplished. That's what most people think are the cause for misalignment, or the primary cause. And in reality, though, the statistics are much different than one would expect. And if you think about it, first of all, 60% of the differences have to do with the definitions. You know, what is estate planning? If you ask that to each member of the family, you might get many different answers. So what does a trust do? What's the value of a trust? People's understanding of terms or belief systems come into play in a significant way. And then also different data. You know, some people just don't have the information. So if you think about working with more than one person at a time, you can see how this comes into play. Is if you're having a conversation with a husband and wife, or you're having a conversation with the whole family, you might throw out a term that has different meaning to each one of those people in the room. And so checking in on those things are vitally important for you to be a great communicator. So let's look at it a little bit further. And let's look at what drives action to get to alignment. We talked a little bit about this last month, and the first one is so that everybody understands what is the objective. What are we trying to accomplish? And to get clarity around that. If people don't have clarity around where they want to go, they're certainly not about to take action. However, I see that in a lot of cases as I work with families, is that while many advisors think that everybody's clear as to goals, that's not necessarily the fact. And that's one of the biggest impediments I've found to actually having clients take action. The second is, what's the case for action? Why are we even having this conversation today? And then the third area is the barriers between where we are now and how we're going to accomplish our goals. And that might be an interesting conversation for you to have with clients as you embark on a new relationship, to get in their mind and see what do they think are some of the barriers from their point of view. And that can open up a whole rich area of conversation for you and your client. And then lastly, it's the unintended consequences. People don't act because they have this nagging sensation that if they do something, something bad will happen that that they didn't consider. And so that's another reason. So these 4 areas, according to Chris Argyris, the father of behavioral development at Harvard, who's now deceased, developed this working theory about why our clients, why we don't take action, even though sometimes it might seem logical to other people. So in the groups of people that we've done alignment studies on, we've gauged from 0 to 100 where they fall as to a degree of alignment. because alignment is not necessarily we're aligned or we're not aligned, although that's what you hear a lot of people discuss around the conversation of alignment. And from our scale, which is 0, which is total chaos, to 100, where everyone is in lockstep agreement, what we found is that the groups we've studied initially are anywhere from 44 to 83 on that spectrum. So you can imagine, as we're going to see in a second, if you started any project where there's that level of misalignment going on in the conversation. So we go through a series of steps, and one that are somewhat familiar to you, of course, is to do a survey. Now, we do a much more advanced type of survey than just this one component, but this will give you an idea. We have a best practices survey, and we have a different survey whether or not you're a family member or you're a leader of the family business or you're on the advisory team. And yes, we do survey the advisory team. And what we do is we ask them to respond to questions that relate to very important factors that every family has to deal with. And from that, we can give them an analysis of their degree of alignment, which looks something like this, and this is only one component. So we talked about the 4 things that people need to have clarity around to act, which is the goals, unintended consequences, issues, and barriers, and underlying assumptions. And that's to the left. We can refer to that as GUBA. And so in that, the areas that we survey relate to those 4 areas, as you just saw. What you saw on the screen before was goals, and I'm just showing you a very small sampling. It doesn't take long for clients to do that survey, but it's quite extensive, and there are a couple hundred questions that they respond to. By the way, once we do that question, we analyze the outcome, and we do another round of questioning for any of the questions that are on the tails of the bell curve. In other words, where they express an opinion that's different from the group. And we ask them to give their rationale for that position. So that helps us get more information and more data, which is missing as cause of misalignment. So this is quite an extensive process. And so let's take a look at, out of 225 alignment cycles that we have done, there are usually about 167 questions that we survey. And on the areas of goals, there are an average of 66 different aspirations of goals. As far as the degree of alignment, Schelling points are complete alignment, and convergent means that you have a good degree of alignment on that. So 25 of 66 in the average group, there's some consensus around. So if you think about that, that's less than 40% agreement as to what are the goals we're trying to accomplish. Now, if you think about that, if you're endeavoring to do anything and 6 out of 10 people don't have the same idea of what the outcome should be, how difficult do you think it would be to achieve a successful outcome? So as you see there, there's 41 out of the 66 where there's varying degrees of analysis of any type of agreement. So as you think about working with the family, wouldn't it be important to know where they have alignment and where they don't have alignment? Where they have alignment, you can move forward very quickly because that's the low-hanging fruit. And then where they have misalignment, you know where you have to do more work. And that ratio of about 40% being aligned occurs around the other 3 issues as well. So that's very common. What we do, though, is we are able to, this is one of the reports that we do, which shows the different groupings of people. In this case, we have Gen 1, 2, and 3, along with the leaders of the business and the advisory team. And we're able to discern the level of alignment within each group and between each group. And we can drill down into specific responses that they make, and we could see what data and information we got from people as part of the process, and can slice and dice this many different ways. This can be done, the good thing about it, it can be done very quickly. We used to take 6 months to do a very thorough discovery process with our clients. With this tool, we can literally, in many cases, do this in a matter of a week or 2. and more importantly, where we go in and there's different families. There's a family we work with in an auto dealership. There's 4 different family owners, and they're all not talking to one another. But the tax attorney had brought us in because they had to get some things done, and we were able to do this because it's done anonymously. So all the responses, everything we get, are not attributed to other family members, and it can be done really in a matter of about an hour and a half, done anywhere in the world via the internet. So with that in mind, let's go on to our second poll question.
Thank you, Mike. Here we go with, when working with the primary couple, what percentage of time do you involve the children in the planning phase? Select one of the following. And again, we'll get a good cross-section here. And we'll close the polls and share the results. So smattering around, Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, it's great to see so many people involving the children. And I appreciate that in every case it might be difficult to do or not appropriate at a given time. But I will tell a little brief story here. I'll jump the gun. And it's dealing with the one family I was brought in by MD Anderson. They had a major donor in California and Los Angeles. And what the problem stemmed from was it was actually a car wash, but it was a very big car wash on some very valuable property. And the mom was had been widowed, and she had her eldest daughter was an accountant, and she is an accountant. And so the daughter was a faithful daughter and served as her mother's CFO, and they had a thriving business. And so the mother wanted to do something special for the daughter. And so what she did was she paid off the debt and had a meeting one day and gave her, the mother gave the business and the property to her daughter, and left the other assets in her estate to the other children. And when thinking that that would be, a welcome and joyful event, the daughter ended up crying. And so the mother was distraught and said, honey, why are you crying? I thought you would love this. And she said, Mom, I've just been working with you because I love you so much, but I can't stand this business. So you can imagine what came from that. So that's why just one example of a reason why it's so important to involve the children to some degree before making final arrangements for plans for matriarchs and patriarchs. So with that, let's go into a discussion about conflict resolution. And this is a little bit of a sticky issue to get involved in the midst of a conflict. Pardon me. But what I want to put up here are the reasons why, pardon me, why our families that I deal with have conflict. The first and more important is people's unmet expectations. We do a great deal of work developing expectations with our clients because we know how when you have those unmet expectations, it leads to fear and greed. And so what we do is we not only look at the expectations from the people, but what are the root causes? Where does that expectation come from? And many times it's rooted in, family, a person's upraising, their early years in life, or even later years in life that cause that fear or that greed to develop. We talk about what their contribution to that is and what are possible solutions. Unforgiveness is right up there. We work a lot with people around forgiveness, and there are many other really important things. One that ranks up there as well as just people have poor communication skills. They can't have a deep and conversation about important issues without getting too emotional. They just don't have the skill sets. We oftentimes see substance abuse, boundaries being violated, where people are doing things for people they shouldn't be doing, which causes this entitlement mentality. They just don't have a high degree of emotional intelligence. Their wiring's different. They don't understand one another, and they don't separate business from family. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. So the question is that those are the most important aspects of conflict resolution, and the question is whether or not that's something you want to be actively involved in. But I will say this, if you're working with a family of wealth, there are conflicts and they're seething underneath the surface, and so it's important to be prepared for that. When we work with people, we talk to them about the basis of their behavior, and that is, there are four of them: acting, how people act, how people think, how people feel, and just physiology, which is, are they healthy or not healthy? And as you know, people's behavior is affected if a person is just not healthy. What's interesting about those four is there's only two of them that you can actually control, and that's how we act and how we think. And so we work a lot with people to give them the confidence to know that they are in control of that, and we give them the way to act and think much healthier in many cases than they might. Feelings is something you can't control. When you're hurt, you feel it. But we do work with people around how do you express those feelings a little bit more positively so you can have a good conversation. Something that we all go through is something I refer to as the cauldron of change. It's kind of like the pit of despair for your Princess Bride fans out there. And think of that dark blue line as the experiences that our clients have when they have a disruption in their life. Something happens, a destabilizing event that causes them to change from the status quo. And I will tell you that most people, not everyone, but most people just go into a state of fear when their world is rocked, when things that were once comfortable and reliable are no longer that way. That light blue line, that squiggly line, represents our emotions as we go through this process. And so what happens in any change is you go through this destabilizing event, and what human beings have a tendency to do is they want to get back to the status quo. They want to get back to how things were comfortable. But if they go back to those ways, they're not going to be able to move on to get to different levels. So the message here is that it's very important as you're bringing change into the lives of your client that you have a mechanism to support them through this change process, because if you don't, and if it's not just, if you don't do that, whatever you bring to change in your clients' lives is usually not going to be sustainable or even maybe implemented unless you can help them psychologically through this process that is very uncomfortable for them to go through. So eventually they will get, and you've had the aha moment, the transformational idea when you really get it, and then you're determined to do what it takes to get to the other side. So just keep this little vision in mind as to what's going on, not only in your clients' lives, but even in your life as you go to try to get to the next level, understanding that squiggly line of emotions from one day being euphoric about the prospect of the change to being depressed. That's what's going on, of course, in your clients' lives, and they need you, and they need that continuous support to bring them to the other side. Another important aspect of dealing with conflict is to understand why it happens. And conflict, of course, is where you have different values between people or different thinking between people. So if you think of it as this ladder, and what we start with, and let's just say it's a childhood event. So let's say there's a divorce that happens in the family. So you're there, you're like a video recorder, videotaping as much of that scene as you can, but you can't get it all. And then you have data you draw from that. Well, you know, I see people arguing, I see not a lot of love, I see abuse, and then you add meaning to it, is that, you know, these are things that mean that maybe people aren't loving here. And then you make assumptions. Well, if I'm not loved, then I need to protect myself. And then you might take that and draw conclusions that life is just a negative place, and I have to always be on the lookout for somebody out there trying to hurt me. And you take that into a belief system about the world and about it's very difficult to trust people. And so that ends up leading that you end up acting based on what you believe to be the case, what you and your world is true, and then you look for things to reinforce that belief system. It's kind of like people listening either to MSNBC or people listening to Fox. You go where your beliefs are reinforced. But when we are dealing with other people, each of us have our own stories. And it's kind of like, as you often use as the iceberg example, it's what's above the waterline that you usually have those conversations. And you don't take time to learn what the other story, is from the other person. How did they get to that belief system? It's only then that you can really peel back the onion and get to understand how a person comes to the perspective they have. And that takes time, and it takes trust, and it takes intimacy to get to that, but that's what's needed really to resolve these deep conflicts that you might come across in the family. Let's move on quickly to family meetings. And in this case, you're having exponential complexity as you start working with not only 1 or 2 people, but now with 5 or 10 or 20 people. And so in that case, it's real important as you go into that world to do a lot of advanced preparation, not only with yourself, but with each of the clients. And that would take the form of, say, private interviews, where you get to know each person. What are their fears? What are their concerns? What's important to them? What's uppermost in their mind? A client I work with, an engineering family, never had a conversation like that. And there was a lot of fighting and bickering that was going on in the family, and they were going through an estate planning and a transition in the business. There were kids in the business, out of the business. Kids that were in the business were highly functioning and others weren't. And there was just a deep-seated fear of the thought of them getting in a room together and having deep conversations about issues they never had before. So in order to do that successfully, you really have to not only interview the people, but help prepare them for the conversation, educate them on how to communicate effectively, how to understand the difference in wiring, and how to understand the different life stories and why people behave the way they do, and how you can have a healthier understanding. And when you see people, you see them in a different light. And of course, you need to have rules of engagement. You can't bring people like that in a room without really having defined rules of behavior, and you or another person facilitating that have to be at the top of your game. But many times you're walking on the edge where you get very close to things unraveling and falling apart if you lose control. So it can be a very rewarding, and it's a very necessary thing, and but it's a very difficult thing as well, because what's going on in the minds of everybody in that room are the drivers that they are part of who they are and what's important to them, and many of them are listed on the screen here. So you start bringing these types of topics together with a lot of different people. It's necessary, it's vitally important, but it's very challenging. And this is not really talking only about maybe explaining an estate plan to a group of people, but really getting into the fears and the concerns and the expectations and the hopes and the dreams of the people but before an estate plan is done. As far as controlling the room and things, I think many of you seem to be a pretty sophisticated group on the call today, but you probably have seen this, which is how thought goes through our mind. And the first aspect of any situation is the fight or flight type of aspect. It happens automatically, and that's why you have people jump up and leave the room. And so we even go through this process in some detail with people for them to understand how their thoughts are processed. And so when they get into a case when there's a limbic hijack, when emotions raised to a level that are concerning, to know when that exists, to know to take the time out, and to calm everybody down so that they can get to a little bit more of a logical discussion. So another factor, just to move quickly here, many of you know, is the idea of the differences between what's expected from a family member versus a member of a business. And this is another cause for conflict when there are not good boundaries around these different issues. So with that, Trip, let's go to poll question number 3.
Thank you, Mike. For poll question number 3, have you facilitated a process to resolve conflicts within a family or business, excluding your own family or friends? And we'll let a good cross-section respond and review the results. All right.
Well, Trip, that's a really good cross-section again of people and experiences. And really interesting to see that 20% of the group has done that numerous times. We're dealing with really advanced group here. So let's move on for the sake of time. The next area is really one of the most fun areas to do with a family, and that's working around their culture, which we call the noble soul of a family. And this takes on many different aspects. For the sake of time, I won't cover all of them. One of the more interesting is developing the family crest. The reason why I say this is fun is because when you're dealing with a family, sometimes you have a matriarch and patriarch that's highly motivated to develop this work within a family. Sometimes the rising generations of the family aren't quite as interested, or in some cases the in-laws don't feel as comfortable. So it's always great to start off an engagement with a family that wants to delve in these issues and something that they find fun and interesting to do. And this is one of them. I have a picture on the screen. I'll be brief. My daughter gave me this. It's a 3D image of myself, obviously a smaller image. And one of our favorite traditions is the movies we watch. And one of them is What About Bob? And for those of you that know that story, it's about Bob Wiley, a neurotic type of guy who's following around his new mentor, Leo Marvin, who's a psychologist. And it's a funny, if you haven't seen the movie, it's funny, but the psychologist's father deals with his kids, Siggy and Anna, by using dolls. And they had these dolls in the mantle. And so she gave me this just as to continue our traditions around this movie, and we use it when we get into some difficult times. In the story, Bob Wiley's told to do things in small increments called baby stepping. And so whenever we get into a little bit of a issue, we always kid each other about it's time to do baby steps. So this is kind of like the fun part, interesting part of something you could do with your families that's very meaningful. Another major area for family activity is to build a life and legacy philosophy. And if you ask many clients, and I was asked this question, and honestly, I'd have to admit, when I was practicing, I couldn't say with confidence I knew what are the top 5 goals of your biggest clients. And being able to know that and have top of mind awareness is really important in that regard. And so what I do with my clients, and I felt was missing, is really to hear their voices, not the hard data, but also the soft data of what's important to them. And so we create for all our clients usually about a 15 or 20 page narrative that covers many of or all of these topics that you see on your screen, which we put in a narrative form to share with all of the advisors, so that the advisory team as a whole can all be on the same page, not only with the data relative to our clients, but really what is their voice, what is their passion for the future and their family. And this is a very meaningful document to the clients, and also a great communication tool as we work with children to have discussions about very important issues. Another area of family activity is working in the family history. There are some programs. One, well, there's two good ones. One that comes to mind is Family Arc, which is a tool that advisors can use to capture many of the things that are on the screen on a cloud-based platform. But doing things like doing family history videos is very powerful. What you're trying to accomplish here is you're trying to accomplish the identity of the family, the glue that's going to keep them together, not only for the current generation, but generations to come. If you think about it, if you've had a parent that's passed on or a grandparent, and they left behind for you a video, if they had them back in the day, or audio, a recording, or even a 10-page letter that talked about many of the things that were important to them, that would be extremely valuable. And we're going to talk about something along those lines in the ethical wills here in a second. But we oftentimes do annual videos with our clients so that they can see the progress that they make from year to year and year. The oldest one we've done so far is 7 years. So, but the family, they have an annual meeting every year, and we take a little bit of those and we show them and show the differences between where they were 7 years ago and what was on their mind then and what they were hoping for and what they accomplished as recently as last year. And it's really powerful. On my website, I have kind of a sample of that under testimonials and then video testimonials that you could take a quick look at the format, at least. So, I mentioned I put family calendar. You might say that's weird, but that's really just to help a family remember what happened in what time frame, because things are. I heard somebody say just a while ago, which resonated with me. It's kind of life. Life is like a roll of toilet paper. The closer you get to the end, the faster it goes. And so with the family calendar, that'll help keep things in some chronological order. But and we have built a website that family offices and family use to do all of these things. It's kind of like Family Arc, but on substantial steroids because it's used to manage family offices, and we do offer that if you're interested. It's fairly low cost, and as far as it's so. Well, I won't go into the details, but it can be very low cost compared to some of the options that are there. Along these same lines, since to bring us to a close here, is the conversation around ethical wills, and this is passing on. Unlike a will, which passes on your material possessions, this passes on your traditions, the things that are important to you that are non-financial. It's not what people will have, but what they need to know about their family. And ethical wills are some of the most beautiful works of art in many cases that are out there as people really discuss their hopes and dreams, the regrets they had in life, maybe the intimate secrets that they didn't feel comfortable expressing during their life. Oftentimes it deals with regrets and apologies that they want to express to individuals and encouragement to family members, dreams of what the future might be like for them, passing on their traditions, their life lessons. This is a powerful tool that is often overlooked in the process of worrying about passing on people's materials, possessions. But this, in many cases, can be one of the most prized possessions, as you can imagine, that people have in life. A quick story here. A person had a chest that was in their home, and it looked like kind of just a little antique chest, and they didn't really have a particular purpose for it. And so they were just about ready to put it up in a garage sale when another family member came by and said, "You can't do that. That's been in the family for 250 years," and went on to tell about the story of what purpose that served in the family. And so it went from being just an article to to disclose at whatever price to a prized possession that the person would never part with. So that's just a small example of how these things can be very valuable. So that kind of brings us to an end of some of the discussions around family, some of the things you could do to be involved with your families. As you know, I appreciate that many of you might have a very focused practice and do a wonderful job in a particular area. And many of these things we talked about, you could see the value of them, but you may not feel comfortable. Maybe this isn't your skill set, but you do see the value it would bring, and you do see the tie-in that you will have with your families if you, or in some form or fashion, can help facilitate this, whether, again, you do it yourself or whether you bring in a firm like ours to collaborate with you. You know, we're welcome to answer questions or have discussions with you about how that might work. But in leaving you, we are developing a program you mentioned. It's called, excuse me, it's called Rising Leaders Forum. And this would be a great opportunity because it's the coming together of 12 members of a family of wealth and that own businesses, the rising generations that need to learn and be mentored around stewarding the family wealth and the family business. And that's, as you know, the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves example. Not many families are successful in the process. So what we're going to do is develop a multi-generational process. It does start with a group of 12 rising leaders, but the methodology is where we bring together the generations, the matriarchs and patriarchs with their children, with the leaders of the business. It's a curriculum for 1, 2, or 3 years that at the end of that time they will emerge being able to, in a very mature and confident manner, be able to assume ownership of the family business and leadership and steward the wealth, and they themselves to be qualified to have and learn the insights and tools to have a life of joy, purpose, and abundance. And in 1999, when I asked my clients what's the one thing that I could do for them, and this is when I had my advisory practice, it was really not about the money. It was about if you could help my wife and I get on the same page, if you can reconnect with me to my estranged daughter or son, you can help me figure out a way to guide my children and grandchildren to a life of happiness and life of fulfillment and purpose. Those would be the greatest things you could do for me. And so that's really the basis for the Rising Leaders Forum. We do have a big role for advisors in the process. During the sessions, the day-long meetings, we have an advisory board at midday to talk about and help these rising Gen members learn about the technical aspects that they need to know to be successful in stewarding wealth and the family business. And so a lot of opportunities here. So that's another thing. If you're interested in learning more, just send me an email. So you and Trip, that brings us to the end of our discussion. So we can open it up to some Q&A in the few minutes we have remaining.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. And if anybody wanted to add some more questions, there were some more tactical ones that were sent. Use that question or chat box. But beyond that, also know that the recording of this webinar has been made and will be made available to all the attendees, as well as the deck. And there's a handout that's also available. So all these things will be sent and provided to you guys, as well as a notification of the third of the series coming up next month. And I think that covers all of the housekeeping things. Hugh, did you have something you wanted to share? Closing statement?
Well, again, Mike, thank you for a wonderful presentation. And I thought, you know, a lot of the components that came out today were very good. And I think, you know, what I want to reinforce for everybody listening on the call is the need to understand the different perspectives of the different family members and you know, how they come about. You know, there's components of just how those family members are born and how they are hardwired, and that leads to different perspectives and to the life experiences that they have. And you know, I just know that even in my own family, where I have a younger brother, he and I are both polar opposite, and whilst we had very much and we're 15 months apart in age. I'm the elder, and he's the younger, and he's a doctor. And we're just so polar apart in how we see the world, because we're naturally wired differently. We've processed our life, our family upbringing, our schooling very differently, even though a lot of it was the same. But there were some different life experiences that happened earlier in our lives as well, and that all go in the mix there. And then our mother has to deal with that, and our father died early in life. And I think, but it's just what I'm really trying to bring out there is just that in doing this work, it really does need an independent consultant to be in the middle there, who can be impartial to really see these different perspectives and to see the different strengths and the different blind spots. And I think those points were brought out really well today by Mike.
And with that, we'll give everybody a couple minutes of their time back. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again real soon.
Thanks, everyone, for being on the call.